Today, Saturday after Ash Wednesday, we come to the church Sant'Agostino. A few steps from the bustle of Piazza Navona, we find ourselves in a quiet square before the graceful column of today's station. Originally, today's liturgy was celebrated in the church of St. Tryphon. This was an older church, which once stood to the right as one faces the current church. It would eventually be demolished to make room for the adjacent Augustinian convent, which was later confiscated by the Italian government after the invasion of Rome in 1870. The Church of St. Augustine, or Augustine, under the patronage of the great pastor and author of the 4th and 5th centuries, dates back to the medieval period. Work on the church began in the year 1296, with construction finally reaching its end in the year 1446. Soon after, this was almost completely rebuilt as a present structure, beginning in the year 1479 and being completed in the year 1483. While the exterior appearance still asserts the Renaissance origins of this church, interior modifications began to be made almost as soon as it was completed. The pillars of the nave were covered with frescoes in the mid-16th century. The high altar, a work of Bernini, an early work of his, was constructed in the years 1626 to 1628. Additional renovations took place in 1750 and in 1860. And through all of these changes, the interior has maintained its order and proportions, reminding us of the age in which it was built, when the new intellectual ideas of the Renaissance were spreading throughout Europe. The facade of the church, made with stone recycled from the Colosseum, presents us with one of the best examples of Renaissance architecture to be found in the city of Rome. And as we enter the church through the center doors, just to the right, we notice a statue, La Madonna del Parto, finished in 1521. Many expectant mothers come here to pray for a successful delivery. Continuing ahead into the right aisle, the first chapel we encounter is dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria. It contains a painting of the patroness on slate, one of the first of its kind in Rome. This was used because it was thought it would decrease the glare produced by the painting and allow for more detail in the work. The chapel at the terminus of the transept on the right is dedicated to the church's patron, St. Augustine. The main altar has an image of St. Augustine with St. John the Baptist and St. Paul the Hermit, all of them considered great masters of the contemplative life and remembered together here because many early communities of Augustinians were dedicated to the eremitic life. Crossing over to the left aisle, we find ourselves before a small chapel, under the altar of which is the resting place of Saint Monica, the mother of St. Augustine. When speaking of her own indifference as to where she would be buried, even so far from home as here, she passed in Ostia, Monica said, "Nothing is distant from God, and there is no ground for fear that he may not acknowledge me at the end of the world and raise me up." Originally buried in the Roman seaport of Ostia in the year 387, her remains were translated to St. Tryphon in the year 1430, and later moved into the current church. Her original sarcophagus is set into the wall to the left. The current one is from the year 1760. We might take a moment to reflect upon this woman whose steadfast faith and constant prayers would win for God the great saint after whom this church is named. Saint Monica is the patroness of wives and mothers. If we continue further down the aisle, we pass into the nave at the fourth pillar from the altar to admire Raphael's painting of Isaiah. When Michelangelo was shown it by the donor, who thought it had been overcharged, Michelangelo replied that the skill with which the prophet's knee alone had been depicted was worth the full paid price. And finally, in the last chapel is the artistic highlight of this church, Caravaggio's Madonna of the Pilgrims. Executed in his characteristic style, it first attracted attention for its portrayal of the worn and dirty pilgrims before the Blessed Virgin, which was seen as scandalous by some at that time. However, with the eye of faith, it's only too fitting that it is here, helping us to reflect on how just as St. Monica aided her son to find Christ, so too does Christ's mother, Mary, aid us through her intercession, so that stained though we may be from our journey through this world, we might be received into the presence of her Son.